So we've started now to explore just applying basic fabrics to the character, and we've already seen that making the bodice area leather has had a dramatic change on how the garment falls on the avatar. Previously, with the default material, it was just sliding down, but adding in leather has just made the fabric a little bit more rigid. And to be honest, that's the sort of look that we're after for that area. We want it to be made out of leather. Whereas the skirt is made out of satin, so that's flowing a little bit more freely, which again is more the look that we're after. Now, those are just basic, that is just a basic look at the fabrics, and again you can adjust your own and create your own by editing these attributes down here, the stretch weft, stretch warp. Now the weft and the warp, I didn't really understand what those terms were when I started using this, but when I looked into it, it's quite simple really. It just affects, it's basically the flow of the weave in the garment. I found a picture online which explained it really nicely. It's quite simple. So warp is basically the vertical thread and weft is basically the horizontal thread. If you think about it like that, it makes things a little bit easier. So let me just remind myself. Weft is left. Maybe think about it like that. So weft, if I adjust the stretch weft, it will adjust the stretch horizontally across the garment. And rather than just adjust it in the fabric, you can adjust it on a pattern basis, and that brings us nicely into the property editor. So if we select, let's select our bodice here, maybe the bottom area. As you can see down here, now we experimented briefly with the elastic option here, just adding in, making some of the edges elastic and not elastic. But down here, we have our particle distance, which we mentioned before. The smaller the distance, the more dense the mesh will be. If I right click in here and go down to, let's look up here, show mesh. So this is how dense it is now. If I drop this down to 5, as you can see the difference there, this area is really dense, so that's going to take a lot longer to calculate. And you can also see the patterns that are connected have also split and tessellated to accommodate. Let's put that back up to 20. But then if you're changing the particle distance, if you've got smaller if you've got a smaller distance, you're going to get more detail in there, so you'll get those small creases. So we'll play around with that before we come to export our main dress. So let's just select this here. Just to speed things up, I'm just going to select the rest of the garments, and I'm just going to deactivate those. So we're only simulating the bodice. Now I know the sleeves drop down and we need to strengthen this area here, but this is just an example and you can go in and adjust those later on. So if I simulate this, now if we adjust this, the shrinkage weft, so if you remember that's a horizontal shrinkage, if we drop that to 0.5, as you can see it's pulled that tighter into the body. In fact, let's do it on the whole garment. So that's pulling that tighter in around the horizontal axis. Just like if we set it to 2, it's going to loosen that up and make it a much more baggier garment. And we can drop the particle distance down to 10 because we're only simulating this. So as you can see, that's quite a nice way to get all those baggy folds and creases. Let's set this back to 1. So we can adjust that just to, if we want to make it baggier or more puffy. The shrinkage warp is the opposite direction, so it's a horizontal axis. So again, if we drop that to 0.5, it's going to pull it tightly in the horizontal axis. Set it to 2, and again we're getting, it's much baggier from the top to the bottom. And what's happening is we're getting these nice overhangs coming down here, so it's it just changes the whole look of the garment. Let's set that to 1. Back to the default value. So thickness simulation and thickness rendering are basically the offset from the avatar. So a thickness of 3, and you will end up with basically a gap between the garment and the avatar. A thickness of 1, if you just saw there, it just pulls it in slightly and just makes it closer to the model. And again, that is down to personal preference. Let's just pull these up here so she's not exposing herself. And we'll just strengthen those like so. So those are those main areas there. What we can also do is add pressure. So if you've got something that's inflated or a puffy jacket, you can go in and add pressure to that area. And if I increase this, as you can see, it's only slight. Let's see if we can up that to 100 is the maximum. Let's see if we can increase this here. Set that to 300. So as you can see, this area around her middle is being puffed out and inflated. Now it's probably because of the fabric we're using, because it's leather. You're probably not noticing that as much. Let's just select it and edit it for the whole body here. So there, it's just puffing that out. So like I say, that's useful for those sort of garments where you've got like a puffer jacket, or if you're creating a duvet and you want the look, you've got that crosshatch sort of look where the pattern's being sewn together, but you want the panels in the middle to look puffy, like they're full of foam or something. So that's where pressure would come in handy. So those are those basic properties there that you can play around with to adjust the overall look of your garment. So I'm going to leave you now to experiment with all those, experiment with the fabrics, experiment with the property editor, and just see what sort of look you're looking for. I mean, you could play around with the weft and warp to get sort of more of a jeany sort of look where the top's quite baggy, but like I say, play around with those, and what we'll do in the next lesson is we will start to look at applying textures.